Hey, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Blind Ambition with Jack Kelly. It's your friend Rick from Blind, and today we are going to introduce you to Charles Beadnall, who's the Chief Technology Officer at GoDaddy, where he leads the company's global platform and infrastructure organization. Before joining GoDaddy in 2013, he was responsible for ad serving and personalization platforms at Yahoo. Before Yahoo, he held engineering leadership positions at MetaWeb Technologies, VeriSign, and W.R. Hambrecht and Company. GoDaddy is the world's largest service platforms for entrepreneurs around the globe. It's on a mission to empower its worldwide community of 21 million customers and entrepreneurs everywhere by giving them all the help and tools they need to grow online. We're excited to have you on the show. Thanks for coming, Charles.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I mean, I don't think I gave your bio enough justice. So if you'll allow us, can you walk us through your career?
Yeah, I think anytime you put a bio together, you put a couple of highlights together. But ultimately, I'd say my career kind of started, right around the time that the internet was starting to become commercialized. Was involved, with using like Archie and Gopher and FTP and things like that. And obviously, the really big shift was the Mosaic browser, and soon after that, Netscape. And the first, company that I had an opportunity to really get more deeply involved with it, obviously as a user, but I joined Turner Broadcasting and helped build out some of the first internet systems for CNN, which was a really fascinating just window into the internet and its potential impact, on people. Obviously, a big news event happens, and everybody has this visceral need to understand what happened, how did it happen, and so you would see these just massive influx, of requests coming in to find out new information about a bombing or like whatever kind of activity happened. And so my career, I think, kind of since that point, has really tracked with large-scale internet companies, and obviously there have been lots of iterations along this path. The network has grown, it's extended to mobile devices, it's extended to commerce, it extended to social media and things like that. And my career has kind of tracked, with that, implementing a lot of new and different technologies along that path. Whether it be at Yahoo and building, the core systems there, or MetaWeb was one of the first semantic web companies. So understanding how the different pieces of data, fit together, into a graph. And ultimately, I think a lot of those technologies have ended up, being underlying and pretty core and fundamental to how we operate. And about 10 years ago, I was approached by basically at the time, CEO of GoDaddy, who had been at Yahoo, and asked to join. And so looked at the company, and it was at an interesting phase at that point. Obviously, it had a good market share, but it needed probably some work, on the technical side. And so really have appreciated having an opportunity to contribute to building out a large scale technical platform to help very small business. So it's got a really great mission in life, as a company, to really help out very small businesses. And a lot of people, when they think about small business, they think of, 20-person companies and things like that, maybe 200. A lot of our customers are solo entrepreneurs. It may be a part-time gig. And so anytime that you can help them take advantage of technology and speed that adoption and usage curve, you're helping them out at the same time. Hopefully, you're helping yourself out at the same time. So that's kind of a little bit of a quick arc of my path.
To follow up on that, so is that where Aero comes in, where now you're infusing AI to help those small entrepreneurs, one person, two-person shop, to make it easy to get a domain name, to get some maybe marketing collateral, and maybe you tell me what other things that they could do with AI now for GoDaddy?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, if you think about, like, what are we in business to do? It's to help these very small businesses get up and running. And when you look at what does it take to do that, frankly, historically, it's been a lot of kind of learning about a domain name, and within a domain name there are these A records and MX records. And so, I mean, again, over multiple years, this didn't all happen kind of in a really short period, but we have continued to improve and make that experience easier and quicker and more expeditious, such that folks that want to cut hair or they want to do photography or whatever, they don't spend their time putting together lots of complex technical infrastructure, but ultimately they're just guided along that path as much as is possible. And so AI, I think, is really kind of an additional tool that we can bring to bear to help those small businesses get those requisite steps done as expeditiously and seamlessly as possible. So I think that it's a huge opportunity. And it's one that I would say we're still in beginning innings, of this whole process. But yeah, we are definitely, focused on helping our customers build out content on their site, helping them find the right domain name in the first place, as they want to sell more items, like upload a photo, have it automatically fill out the text. I mean, anything that we can do along that path to help them out. And I guess this is one area where I'd also maybe provide a little bit more insight into how we operate. Is we do really focus on how we experiment into new technologies. So I think a lot of folks will just say, oh, here's the new technology and here's the product roadmap, and we're just going to go off and do it. And I think I guess, in some ways acknowledge that we don't know the future. And so we are going to experiment our way into that. And so I'd say the Arrow initial product really it was a kind of a big experiment. It was something that we put together, as expeditiously as possible, but obviously did it in a way that we could continue to evolve it, over time. But I think that we came together with a hypothesis that this is a really big customer need. I mean, ultimately, when you think about what a customer wants from us, they want help along that path of going from purchasing a product to actually using it, to having customers find their website, transact, whatnot. We want to help them along that path. We call it the value achieved path. Is something where they are getting value from us. And just because they purchased a domain, just because they may own a particular product set, they're not necessarily getting any value out of that just by giving us the money. So we want to help them along that path as much as is possible, as quickly as possible. And so, yeah, AI is basically a tool that helps us get them from that stage of they gave us money, which is, hey, that's good for us, but it's a lot better for us if they actually use that product as quickly as possible and get as many eyeballs on their site, as many transactions as possible along that path, because that means ultimately they'll be a customer for longer with us.
And if I understand it correctly, it seems like it's woven into the fabric here with experimenting that you'd have. But you have thousands of engineers that you iterate and try. Let's do this and see if it works. Let's try something else to see if it works. So it's interesting to me from an outsider perspective, is that you just don't go in, okay, we're doing it and that's it. It's like, okay, let's try this experiment and see if this is better for our customers. Let's try this experiment. Is that right? Is that how it works?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think, I guess my observation is that there are many companies and organizations that will have a narrative about here's what we're doing and how we're going to go about it, and they kind of build out the roadmap, and ultimately the narrative will support that roadmap for quite a long while, and you can really kind of go down that path pretty far before you figure out that maybe that wasn't the best path. And so what experimentation in my mind really does is it forces you to have the premeditated thought that goes into if I do this thing, this is the result that I would expect to happen. So you really got to have that key observation of, hey, I think customers want this. But it also forces you to look at the data that you have about customer usage and purchase paths and things of that nature, and put together a hypothesis that if I did this, this is what would happen. And in doing that, you really start to form the kernel of, inverting that whole product roadmap into, basically a series of experiments that you can do iteratively over time. And so you can learn very quickly, oh, wow, that I was totally wrong. There's something else that's happening here. And ultimately, it forces you to figure that out, at an earlier stage, as opposed to really moving down the path really far and then having the insight, oh, gee, maybe we didn't go quite down the right path. And again, many companies can go down that path and it works out quite well. But I think that that inversion is really a key learning for me from different companies that I've been at. Obviously, Yahoo spent a lot of time, running experiments, having a common platform for running a lot of experiments. That is something that we have implemented. And so really institutionalizing that such that any engineer, any product leader in the company can come forward with an idea and we can run an experiment on it. And ideally, many of these experiments can be run with fairly minimal effort. I mean, we don't always have to go off and build some new platform or some new tool. You can also just test the user behavior to see, would they go down a particular path if it were available to them before you go off and build the underlying, service or product, underneath that. And so I've heard engineers, or at least one of them, say that, experimentation is kind of like crack for engineers, because ultimately, as an engineer building a product, you just want to know that people are actually going to use it. And so if you're going down and working on like a roadmap of items that you're just continuing to deliver, and you don't see the data coming back that says, yeah, this is actually being used as you're deploying the code, you lose some of that fidelity of, and the kind of reaction of, hey, what I did actually matters to customers and they're using it. Whereas if you have that hypothesis, you have the data that you can see coming back in terms of customers using it, you get the feedback immediately that yes, people actually value this feature or this capability that I've launched. And it really, I think, more tightly integrates the product and engineering teams together and in the service, of ultimately the customer.
Charles, as a leader, do you run into this where you have these software engineers feeling, I have the answer, this is the right way, and you're experimenting, but then someone has to tap them on the shoulder and say, well, it's not working. Do you get some conflict, or is it pretty, everybody is okay to say, all right, this is not working, I'm going to just stop doing this and move on to something else?
Yeah, I would say there's a lot less conflict with experimentation than there would be without it. I think if you look at kind of a more traditional kind of product roadmap, everybody's got an opinion, whether it be an engineer or a product leader. And ultimately, it's kind of a battle of the wills or a hippo, kind of situation where somebody's going to win, but it's based on the narrative, based on the level of influence, or who can shout the loudest or have the most overwhelming, verbal arguments. Whereas I think when you focus on running the experiment and having the focus be on the data, it's ultimately a great leveler, because ultimately this is the data, this is the output that we all agreed upon in the experiment, and the data will speak and it will say, this is what customers want, this is what customers don't want. So there's far fewer disagreements. And I think it ultimately pulls people together because they'll see the data and say, well, gee, that's not expected. Or maybe some of them will say, yeah, well, I told you so. But along that way, I think that, it really does help bring teams together, in the service of the customer in a way that I think a lot of more traditional kinds of, roadmaps and things like that just don't have the capability of doing.
Charles, I want to pull a bit at this thread because I find this discussion of how you built a culture of experimentation pretty interesting, right? I think some people might be surprised to hear that from a public company CTO, to be very frank, right? Where there may be other competing priorities at hand that might, you know, not allow for the time to experiment, right? Where maybe you're getting pressure from other parts of the org that says, no, just do it once and do it right and do it fabulously and get it done. I mean, how did you create this culture within your organization and at the company?
That's a great question. I think it certainly takes a good amount of executive sponsorship, and our CEO is, I think very supportive, of this method and has been one of the greatest champions of it. I think we also have a really good team that both built the underlying technical platform for collecting the data, and leveraging that. Um, but I think, in terms of how do you switch the culture? I think, and I'd say, there are certainly parts, of the company that we've moved further faster, and other parts where we're probably more in the nascent stage. So it definitely is like a cultural phenomenon that takes a while to kind of move along that, path entirely. And it is something that we celebrate internally. I think one of the most well-attended meetings, that's run in the company is really this experimentation showcase where we highlight the top 10 experiments that get voted on. And, some of them are successes, some of them are failures, some of them are draws. But ultimately, we celebrate the failures just as much as the successes because there's learnings involved in those failures. So I think that it is something that happens kind of at a deep level, but to, kind of focus on the question of like, hey, do it right. Well, that's fantastic. If you're really certain and you really understand exactly what the customer wants, sure, maybe it's a little bit faster. But I think if you think about it, you're not always going to be right. And I think the other thing is, why wouldn't you want to know that you were right, like with data to back it up? And so the amount of effort it takes, like again, there was some real work that happened for us to kind of get to a point where we had a platform, we have data flowing from all of the different experiences such that we can start to, measure whether it's, cash receipts or customer activation or whatever it is. It does take some effort to get to that level of data, surfacing that, making it available. But once you have that, it's relatively easy to create an experiment. And so if you know that you're right, well, just instrument the experience and you can basically have the data, whatever, however long it takes. I mean, statistically, it depends on which experience, how long it would take to get to the, kind of 80%, certainty that you were right. Could be a week, could be a month, but something along those lines. Why wouldn't you want to know that you were right? For a relatively low cost. So I'd say, yeah, there is some upfront cost to kind of put the pieces in place, but you also want to have that such that you can instrument the data across your different experiences, which is valuable for a whole bunch of other reasons. But then the actual cost of running each individual experiment is pretty lightweight.
What are some examples of the data? Is it, because I know you mentioned about customers, and I guess you have very rabid fans as customers because it sounds like they reach out to the company and say, hey, I love this, or maybe not so much. But what other data points do you put all together?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, as many different data sources as we can. I mean, whether that be the internals of the systems, but obviously all of the kind of the core, the customer surface areas, whether that be the advertising campaigns that they may, have clicked on to get to, our sales site, the products that they looked at, what they put in their cart, what they purchased, the products that they purchased, how many of them did they use and activate, ultimately the traffic that goes to the sites. So there's kind of a pretty broad spectrum of data that we pull together. It's over 1 billion different, interactions that happen, every month that we can, kind of pull together and see, what's happening, across those different surfaces. And obviously we're going to continue to add more and more because ultimately all of that data, helps us create this virtuous cycle where we get more data in, we're able to create more tailored experiences for our customers on the other side of it.
I mean, perhaps the proof is in the pudding. Your tenure at GoDaddy has involved some pretty ambitious projects, as I understand it. Your team has built a search engine from scratch. I believe you have created more than 50 large language models. I mean, how do you prioritize the projects and decide what technical problems to take on when, the company's mission is quite ambitious and the scope is quite large? Where do you focus?
That's a great question. And I, I wish I could give you like a super simple, answer to that. And I'd say the company has gone in different phases along the years. I'd say the first phase was really to build the best product or the second best product in every major category that we're in, whether it be domains or sites or email. We really wanted to up level our product capabilities. And the phase that we're on right now is really making those much easier to use together. And so I think, ultimately it comes down to what is going to both build a common technical platform underneath all of that that is beneficial to multiple different products. And so again, experimentation and data platform would be good examples of things that you can build across the different experiences, but you can leverage it multiple different times across multiple different businesses and products and experiences. So focusing on that while at the same time focusing on some form of value, to the company too, whether that's selling more products or, getting greater usage and activation. I'd say it's a combination of those two things where if you can see how you're going to basically make more money or help the customer do their jobs better, and you can build a common platform, in the process that could be used for other things. That's kind of the magic combination where those are the obvious ones. I think the areas where you're going to build a platform, but you don't really have the particular use case or the value that you're going to drive, those are hard. We've done a couple of those, but just because we knew that if you don't do this, there are going to be other things down the road you can't do. And so there's certain areas where you have one-way doors and two-way doors where you can, just do something and throw it away in reverse if you don't find that it works out, and other places where once you go down a path, like you're totally stuck. So you really have to kind of think about that. But I think, at a super, kind of meta level, I think each of the major steps that we've taken has been premeditated in terms of, all right, we're going to build products that are the best. We're going to leverage common, technical infrastructure that is the best, which enables our engineers to build, better products. And obviously now, focusing on, AI and common tools that can help us build connected experiences, for our customers. So each of these things is kind of, had premeditated thought that's gone into it.
No, I appreciate this vision that you've kind of laid out. Um, you know, how did you get to that point, in your engineering leadership, your kind of career arc that you mentioned? How did you get to this point for what's the transition like from an individual contributor, coder, programmer, all the way to being able to, communicate at this level and set organization-wide, company-wide strategy and vision?
That's a great question. And this might be an oversimplification, but I always think of it as being a problem solver. And along the way, to kind of become a manager, you're solving a bigger problem than you might have, or a different problem, something that's important to the business that you might not have been able to have solved individually, and kind of each step along the way. So I think a lot of it is really understanding enough of the business that you can be thoughtful about applying yourself to solve a problem that's important to the business. I mean, I think that's kind of the story of my arc has really been focusing on what does the business need and I'm going to help solve that problem. I personally am motivated, by solving problems. And I think, as a technologist, it's fun because ultimately you're getting to apply technology and people to solve, fundamental, business challenges. And again, like at GoDaddy, it was let's build the best products. Like that's a fun experience, in and of itself, building the core search mechanism for finding a domain name and things like that. Those are great technical problems, but they're also really key to the business. And obviously, some technologists like solving problems, even like technical problems, even more so than business problems. But I think if you can marry those two together, like find the right business problem that you're going to solve, and the right technical problem, like that's where, you kind of reach this maximal, kind of satisfaction, as a technical person. Um, and so obviously each step along that way, it's really trying to keep looking at, all right, what's the next problem to solve? Like, what does the company need from me? We need to pull, our services and products together better. Like, what are ways to do that? As an example.
You know, hearing you talk about this is the key, one of the keys to success after decades of doing this work. I love how you say it's fun. Like, most people, when they're working for years and years and years, they don't classify their job as fun anymore. So is that what kind of keeps you fresh and excited, that you just love doing this work and it's something you wake up in the morning and you can't wait to get into the office and get it working on a project?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of have to. Like, if you don't enjoy it, you should probably find something different to do, at some point. And of course, like every job, I mean, there are certain things that get mundane or whatnot, but I think that, having that view of like, what am I going to do? What problem am I going to solve? How am I going to help the company? And to be in a position, and again, you don't have to be the CTO to solve problems for the company. I mean, you could be a line level engineer working on a particular area, but you just have to think about it in a different way in terms of how am I going to solve, business problems? How am I going to contribute? And again, I think we're trying to create a culture that it encourages that, like at every level of the organization. You can be, a starting engineer, an intern or something like that, and you can come forward with an idea and you can turn that into an experiment. You can basically, run that, out in front of customers and get the data back and say, yeah, like I did something and it was valuable to customers, and here's the data to prove it. And so I think that's certainly like a meta level, but at a personal level, yeah, I mean, I think that you have to have, that motivation and interest in, what the business is doing. And I have seen, a number of folks that if you just focus on the technical side of it and not, the business implications, like it can kind of blind you to what the business finds important. So you do have to have kind of both sides of that equation. Like you really have to pay attention to what the business needs. And obviously you're in a technical role, so you need to, help find the right technologies to map to that as well.
I mean, do you have any advice for, many of our listeners, they work at these huge companies, Alphabet, Microsoft, where it might be challenging to figure out what the business goals are because, maybe it's they only have insight into their unit or maybe even kind of their team or their scrum's function. And so how do they gain that perspective? Do you have any advice for those that are kind of seeking that broader scope or that broader awareness?
Yeah, I had a mentor really early on in my career, and I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was something to the effect of good things happen to people who are useful. And so I think that, I mean, certainly you want to meet with folks and understand like what are the business priorities and things like that. But if you're asked to do something, do a good job at it. I mean, like put your like weight behind it and really do a good job. And I think that will open up the conversations of, hey, what's the next important thing? for the group, with your manager or with other, folks around it. And I think opportunities will start to present themselves. I mean, I think that's kind of like number one is just do a good job of what you've been given. I mean, put your all into it. And then obviously start networking to really understand that perspective of, all right, like, well, I mean, part of it is why was that important or why was that not important? So having that reflection
Right.
on it. But, ultimately, I mean, it's kind of working within the organization to start figuring out what that is. And I know many organizations have implemented, OKRs and things like that, such that a lot of it becomes more transparent, like what are the most important things for the company. So you can kind of see that, and kind of align to that, as well.
Charles, you mentioned about the mentor gave you this advice. Rick and I, we're probably 150 episodes in. And Rick, think about it. I would say what, maybe 70% of the executives we speak to would refer to like, hey, I got to where I am because of a mentor. And what's your take on it? Do you mentor people? Did you have a mentor that helped, got not only that advice you shared now, but like throughout your career that really made a difference?
Yes. And so I think that the nuance that I would put around that is that
Mhm.
when people think about mentorship, they often think about having a meeting with someone, every couple weeks or every month, and I'm going to just magically learn from
Mhm.
a person. And I think it's a little bit different than that. I think ultimately there's got to be a mutual exchange of value, in that process. And the mentors that I learned the most from were basically, superiors, and it could have been one or two or three levels, removed at various different stages of my
Mhm.
career. But I was doing kind of exactly what I had just talked about, where I was working really hard. I was, delivering, value, and that opened up the opportunity to talk to those individuals about what's next, what else can I help with? I think it's really in the context of I'm helping them out, like I'm doing good work that's delivering value to them and helping them in their careers. But they in turn were much more willing to share some of their time with me because, ultimately I helped them out. And so I think when you think about a mentorship arrangement, it's not just going to someone and saying, give me the advice. It's ultimately like helping them in things that matter to them. And then I think that's what opens the door to the reciprocal, support that you get the other way around.
No, I appreciate that advice because I think it can be so easy to take the tactical route, right? Where it's like, oh, I'm going to meet with this person because I've read their bio or I see where they are in the org chart and I want to do that role in, 3, 5, whatever years. Um, can you just give me a download, Charles? Right. And for that other person, maybe they're getting reached out to by a lot of folks, or maybe they simply don't have the time. Or to your point, there's certainly a lot of priorities that they need to get done right now. And so if you're able to, you know, help them out and actually build that relationship and make it a, like kind of a two-way street, then that serves to be quite a powerful unlock.
Yeah, and I think most people that I know, they are always willing to help. And so I think that the one other thing that I would add is you should feel free to ask. And I think it would just be, you know, not just asking for, hey, can you be my mentor? But it's always helpful if you have kind of a proposition of, hey, I need help with this particular thing. Like we have this problem that we need to deal with, whether it be as a company or as an organization. But it's something that we would kind of both self-identify, yeah, that's a problem. We need to address it. But I mean, coming forward and saying, I want to help solve this problem for you. And here I'm willing to do, kind of these things to help along that path. I'd really appreciate your advice on it. I mean, my gosh, like as a manager, why wouldn't you spend time with that person if they're going to help you solve a problem? that you have, and they're willing to help you, with it, like you'd be dumb not to. Of course, you should make the time to spend with that person, and I think that just then, assuming a positive outcome, I mean, that opens a whole bunch of different opportunities down the door.
I mean, I want to pick on this thread a little bit. What if you're earlier in your career and you feel like, oh gosh, like this advice sounds great, but I'm early on, I'm new to the company, I'm new to my career, my function. What if I feel like I don't have much to give to a director or a vice president or a CTO or even a manager? How do I get beyond that kind of hurdle?
Um, yeah, I mean, yeah, you probably wouldn't necessarily start with a VP or something like that. It would probably be a bit more localized, but I mean, I think if
Sure.
you kind of have to know like what's important to your manager. I mean, and if you don't know the goals and objectives of the manager, I'd just start there, like ask and understand like what are your goals and objectives. So I think that yes, I mean start local,
Okay.
and you can obviously expand out from that if you don't understand the lay of the land or what how and where you can contribute. It's probably better to start local because I think if you start asking your VP or something, gee, what's important, and you don't know what's important to your local manager, it it it, it probably won't end like as positive as if you had a pretty good idea of like what those issues were. All right, I've solved those, I've helped solve those issues. Now I'm going to look for a bigger set of issues to solve. If you're immediately jumping to what's the global issue that we're trying to solve as a company, and you may not realize that there are things like right in your own backyard. I mean, like I think it's just logical that you'd want to kind of start more local.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, I think. And it also kind of gives you the confidence, right? Where you're building a track record, you're building a name for yourself, you got a few wins under your belt. And that kind of puts you on the radar of other folks and makes that kind of transition when you do reach out just a bit easier.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, ultimately, that is your reputation. I mean, it'll precede you, and people will know that's the person that really gets stuff done in this area. And so having them reach out and look at some other area, like, yeah, I'm going to be supportive of that because they've really been a rainmaker, when it comes to this other adjacent area. I totally agree.
I mean, on that theme of rainmaking, was there a particular kind of promotion that just proved to be, or a project that proved to be really pivotal to your career? What was it and how did you overcome or achieve it?
That's a really good question. I have a hard time saying there was just this one thing that
Okay.
kind of happened. I think I've always seen it as a kind of almost a linear progression of like looking for the next challenge ahead and solving that. And obviously, kind of, yeah, it was, I knew what early in my career, I knew what the manager wanted and needed. And I, kind of overachieved on that and looked up to the next level. And okay, now I understand this kind of area and I'm going to help deliver for that, area such that it kind of opens up the doors, along the way. If everything that you do like turns out well, like people are going to give you increasing responsibility along the way. And so I mean, there've been a ton of different things that have happened along the way, but it's harder for me to say, well, this one thing was the thing, because I think, I mean, whether it be yeah, looking at different personalization platforms or building out core product capabilities or things like that. It's really just kind of been almost situational, like where you're planted, you want to bloom, in those areas and just kind of keep moving the ball forward, along the way. And so I think sometimes, when people have asked like what was your career objective or something like that, I mean, I had some idea that, yeah, I kind of wanted to be a CTO, but I'd say I've never looked at it like I'm going to become a CTO and I'm just going to do whatever it takes to get there. I've always, approached it more from the
Mm.
perspective of I'm just going to keep focusing on maybe the path more immediately ahead of me, and I'm going to do a good job there. And that kind of just continues to open up, pathways beyond that. And eventually, I mean, ultimately it did work out that way. But I don't know that I would have been necessarily disappointed if I had continued to be challenged and delivered, core capabilities, for the businesses that I was involved in, and having the technical challenges along the way as well.
So that's so interesting because it sounds like what you're saying is that, hey, if I just do good work and keep doing good work, people will notice and people will notice, and then maybe you'll get that promotion and then maybe you'll get that raise, and it just becomes this flywheel that'll move forward. So instead of, and this is helpful, Rick, right? Because a lot of people on Blind, they want to get that promotion right away, or they want to move from Apple to Amazon or whatever. And they're just so focused on this is what I have to do for social clout and social status and what have you. But you're saying basically is do a good job, work hard, and people are going to notice, and it's going to flow and it's going to work.
Yeah, I think so. I guess the only nuance to that is I think
Yeah.
you have to do things that are of value
Mm,
to the business, to the organization, as well. So I mean, I can definitely see, hey, I'm doing really good work, but it's not moving the needle for the
right.
company, and that probably won't, kind of put you on the track that you want to necessarily go on if you're ambitious. So I think that insight in terms of what is important, to the immediate area, to my boss, and again, I'm sure there are going to be numerous folks that, hey, I'm in an area that isn't as important, to the business, and so like that becomes like impossible. Like again, if you have this particular trajectory in mind, maybe you do have to, change. But I think vastly more times it is really just understanding what is important, to that particular business or organization, and making sure that you are really driving, to the positive outcomes.
This sounds really Machiavellian, but so would you, in a way, would you suggest, like, let's say Rick or I are looking for a job, right? We're looking within the company, let's say, and to find out where's the biggest pain point, where is like, everyone's like, and say, all right, how can I get in there and do it and have the skills? And then all of a sudden I'm a hero because I was able to help solve this big problem. Is that something you would suggest, if in a way, if the person has the skills and the ability to say, hey, let me find the really tough stuff and let me go after it. And because that's how I can make my break. And like with Rick's question, that's how I can make it, everything turns around and all of a sudden I get to the next level and another level up.
Yeah, I think that yeah, I totally agree with a couple of caveats. One is that, if it's a tough area and it's not gonna help the company in the long run, that would be, one kind of
Right.
you know uh, thing to be aware of. And then the other is that you have to know yourself, like both what you are good at today and what you're interested in and what you can learn. But I think if you put yourself kind of on that, I'll call it like a bleeding edge, to where you are focused on an area where you have, call it 80% of the skills to address it, and you are confident and motivated to learn the other 20%, that's an area where, yeah, you can
Mhm.
be successful. And I think that has definitely been something for me along my path, where I have taken on responsibilities in a way that it didn't become unmanageable. Like I pushed myself, I wanted to learn, but I also knew what my kind of core capabilities and skills were, such that I had a pretty good read on terms of, will I be successful at this? And so you really have to have some judgment in terms of, yeah, this is a problem. It's really big, and I can do it with these parameters. Like maybe I need some help on this or that. You want to make sure that you're stepping into it with full knowledge as much as you can. Obviously, if you're going to a new company, I mean that's one reason in some ways to stay, with a company for a little bit, in terms of you understand the context of how does this, why is this a big problem at the company? Is it because the company is refusing to invest in it, or things like that? Whereas if you're jumping into a brand new company, you may not have that context. It's really hard to get that from a couple of interviews. So I think understanding that and understanding yourself and understanding, what you're going to be good at. And again, like you constantly have to push yourself, but I think it's pushing yourself in an educated, way, such that, all right, I'm motivated. I want to learn about whether, and some problems in the company are going to be more about people. Some of them are going to be more about a particular technology. Obviously, at the end of the day, a lot of technical problems are people problems. So you have to kind of know which types of challenges you can solve, and which of them you're going to need help with, and can I get that help? Can I line that up to be successful in the role? But I think basically, I think the short answer is yes, with those caveats.
No, I appreciate that reminder for the need for continued introspection and assessment, because I've certainly fallen into this trap earlier in my career where you think you're doing the great work, and then you get to kind of that performance review cycle, and you're just thinking like, oh gosh, I should have like increased scope to earn that promotion. And then you're just trying to figure out, oh, like which of the things that I've done in the last 6-12 months demonstrated increasing scope or impact for the business. Whereas if I had done that all along, continually not waiting till that moment to like think of it, or think of, oh gosh, like I missed out, probably would have served me a bit better in my career early on.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think obviously it's working with your manager to help along that path. But I do think a lot of it kind of falls on each of our shoulders, to kind of have that map, internally of like, what am I good at? What does the business need? How am I going to plot, my path along that trajectory?
No, I appreciate you for sharing your map and giving us this insight into how we can kind of level up our careers. So thanks for coming on the show, Charles.
Great. Well, thank you. I
Thank you.
appreciate it. It was a fun discussion.